morning, everybody. My name is Zaid Abdelaziz. I'm an agriculture engineer. I have BSc in agriculture, plant pathology, and plant protection from University of Jordan, and master degree from University of London in applied entomology. I'm a beekeeper since 1994. And I work now. I'm a retired engineer, and I'm working as an agriculture expert and consultant, as well as I am a beekeeper. Today, I'm going to talk about the feeding of bees mainly during winter, and the most important precautions the beekeepers has to take during winter. Bees, like all creatures, need a source of energy from carbohydrates, sugar, and they also need a source of protein, minerals, salts, and vitamins, all of which they got from pollen, and protein is transferred inside the bee's body into amino acids and glycerol. During the conversion process, vital energy is released. The outputs are used in synthetic process in the building of the tissues of internal organs in the bees. As for the energy results from the digestion of carbohydrates, it's used in vital construction of molecules and muscular activity in impulses and nervous activities, and this helps the bees to fly and to for very important activities. In the cases of lack of honey in the hive, as it's well known that human being is rearing bees in order to get their products for their use as honey. So if the people took the bees without taking the honey bee from the hives, without taking care of leaving some for the bees, so they will have starvation in the hives. So lack of honey in the hive will deteriorate the situation of the hive. So beehive should have the right amount of honey at any time of the year, because the amount of honey is one of the criteria based on it. The queen will work on laying the eggs and monitoring all the activities of the hive. One of the important things in managing the hive is that the beekeeper estimates the amount of honey stored inside the hive and its suitability for the number of bees in the hive. So the amount must be optimum with the situation of each hive. So the quantity of the honey is different from hive to another, based on many criteria. Hives may be exposed to cases of shortage of honey as food inside the hive, and this shortage may occur gradually in spring, autumn, and winter, especially after the beekeepers harvest the honey, which will cause a shock for the hive, and the queen stop laying the eggs. This will cause a deterioration of the hive situation. Food shortages may occur at the beginning of spring, with a large increase in the number of immature bees in the hive, because the immature bees are eaters rather than producers or collecting the nectar from the field, or associated with the environmental conditions such as the interruption of nectar when flowering plants exposed during the flowering period to hot and dry winds, as what happened this season in the Mediterranean area, when the Mediterranean area exposed to hot weather during the flowering season. Also, when a huge number of hives are placed in one site, which causes intense competition between workers for nectar. This depends on the beekeeper managing the hive and keeping the number of hives in the same place, which will cause a shortage in the feeding area. Signs of lack of honey in the hive or lack of food in the hive. Decrease in the amount of honey stored inside the hive occurred in stages. The first stage, the lack of honey on both sides of the brood nest. It's well known that the brood nest always surrounded with food to be easy for the workers to feed the newborn and the larva. The second stage, a decrease in the amount of honey around the brood in the same frame. The third stage is the clear decline of the number of broods, followed by a complete stop of laying eggs. So it's gradually signs of decrease of the food and as honey. The fourth stage, a clear decline in the number of female workers, which may accompany with the workers' death in wax comb cells. And it was very clear for the beekeepers when there's starvation in the hive, when we find that the workers are putting their heads inside the cells and seeking for the food and died in the cells. Hives feeding. In the situation of the decline of the food in the hives, the farmer and the beekeeper must interfere in feeding his hives to save them and to make them continue working actively to follow the season or to develop the brood. So the beekeeper must feed the hives in certain area and certain times of the year, and when he found that the hives are in starvation or decline in the nectar collection. In the event of shortage of nectar and honey stock inside the hive, bees must be provided with either honey or its substitutes of glucose or white sugar. The main condition for feeding the hives after the end of the honey season is that it must be sufficient for the hive to force the workers to store part of it around the brood nest. There are several ways to provide the hives with food, starting with leaving the sufficient amount of the honey when harvesting as food for the bees. The hives can be supplied with frames of honey stored by the beekeepers from the previous seasons, but this has a certain level of danger that the source of this honey might be contaminated or brought from harvested from hives which is infected with certain diseases, which might transfer the disease to the new hives, which is feed on this kind of honey. The bees can be fed on solutions of sugar after dissolving the sugar in the water by placing this solution in the hive feeder, which is called the sugar syrup. This syrup has several concentrations, depends on the season of feeding and situation of feeding. When should you feed the bees? When there are fewer or no source of nectar and pollen in the field, especially in late winter and early spring, in order to stimulate the hive to raise the brood. When preparing a package of packed bees or when placing a new parcel for the aforementioned reasons or for the development of wax glands for these bees or any other bees that were provided with wax bases to stretch them. Before the season, stimulatory feeding is provided to activate the queen to lay the eggs. in preparation of receiving the nectar season, and this requires experience from the beekeeper and knowledge of the flowering dates of plants in any apiary area. When carrying out the process of joining the hives, as well as before carrying out of the partition process, especially in times other than the flood season. When the hive faces the threat of starvation, as mentioned earlier, when introducing a new queen into a queen-less colony to stimulate the bees to accept the queen. In case of bad weather, and the bees may deplete their stores of honey for other reasons. However, the colony will suffer greatly, and to remain strong, it must be fed if the bees are weak for any reason. So those are the reasons or the situations to feed the bees. And when conducting the process of raising queens or producing royal food, to encourage the hive to have many workers to rear the new queens. After harvesting of the honey crop, especially in the periods between flowering season during the year, in order to encourage the queen to continue laying eggs, as mentioned earlier, that this during the harvesting the honey, it's very critical situation. This will cause a shock to the queen, and the queen might stop laying eggs if the beekeeper didn't feed his hives. Goals of hives feeding: preventing hives members from starvation, motivation the queen to double the daily rate of laying eggs, building male and female workers with healthy body and good vital specification, increasing the production of royal jelly, because female workers consume a large amount of honey while producing royal jelly. Wax production, so beekeepers can provide the hives with sugar nutrition when using tires with wax foundation, so that the bees can build these wax foundation at high speed. Goals of hive feeding: increase the success rate of accepting queens entered into hives, feeding the hives before dividing the hives to obtain nuclei with a good nutritional status after the division, as a female workers do not collect the nectar effectively after the division, and feeding the cells after joining them together to obtain a good hive after joining, feeding hives before treating them against pests, because workers who suffer from hunger become sensitive to pests and treatments and may die immediately after treatment. Disadvantages of feeding with honey or sugar: feeding with sugar solutions before the nectar overflow seasons may lead to part of its leaking into the honey inside the hive, which leads to adulteration of the honey. And feeding at the beginning of spring may increase the tendency of swarming, and feeding during drought may cause theft behavior among workers in one apiary or the participation of neighboring apiaries in this behavior. So this must be taken in consideration during feeding the hives, especially thefting and adulteration of honey. Feeding beehives late in the year, especially in winter, may lead to poor digestion and accumulation of feces inside the bee's digestive tract, and the workers become unable to fly with bloating, the hard burning of the abdomen, which cause nosema, infected with nosema. This may lead to migration of the winter cluster of bees, so that the workers being to suffer from another problem, which is exposed of the cold. And under the stress of this situation, the wasting of the workers and the weakness of the hives increase, and it may lead to their death. This happened especially if the feeding with a diluted solution, with less concentration of sugar during winter. Feeding hives with sugar candy. Many people ask, what is the best food for bees during winter? Sugar candy is the best food for honeybees during winter, so feeding with sugar syrup must stop during winter due to the following reasons. Humidity, which will cause nosema, as mentioned earlier, and raise the humidity in the hives, and cool the brood, which will cause a hive deterioration and might cause a death. Candy. Candy is a sugar candy. Duff is a solid sugar feed that is provided to bees in the winter as well as the fall season. It largely compensates for this last sugar solution, which is a source of moisture spreading in the cells in winter. The beekeeper chooses the duff to avoid an increase in the percentage of moisture inside the cells, the hives, as well as when placing it for the bees. The beekeeper does not open much on the hives when he is using the candy, as if he is using the syrup. It is known that the winter has cold air currents that harm the bees, and it's also a source of energy for the bees. By feeding with a paste or the candy, the beekeeper does not open the hives much in winter, and the paste can compensate for the sugar solution in winter. Advantages of feeding bees: the possibility of feeding at any time, morning, noon, sunset, without fear of the theft behavior between bees, as well as feeding in any season of the year without fear of coldness of the sugar solution. Candy absorb humidity from the hive. So instead of increasing the humidity and the moisture in the hive when using the sugar syrup, the candy will absorb the moisture from the hive, which will keep the hive dry and warm. The difference between sugar syrup and sugar candy: bees always prefer high concentration source of energy. Bees consider sugar syrup as a nectar, so they collect it and store it in the comb cells. This will cause a honey adulteration. After adding syrup, bees frenzy move and circle around the hive. So after adding the syrup, we will notice that the bees is very active around the hive. So this will make it at certain extent aggressive. Syrup used at temperature more than 20 Celsius, while bees' capability to use it decreased when temperature below 17 Celsius. Syrup encourage workers to build wax and encourage queen to lay eggs. So this, which make it very difficult for the bees, especially during winter, to keep these brood warm. Sugar syrup should be replaced by hard candy as soon as the average ambient temperature drops below 17 Celsius. Hard candy is the preferred method of feeding overwintering bees. Syrup raises the humidity in the box and lower temperature, which might cause development of decays in the box and brood cool. Bees consider candy as a crystallized honey, so they eat it directly. As mentioned earlier, The bees consider the syrup as nectar, so can store it in the combs, while bees consider candy as crystallized honey, so they eat it directly. So they didn't store it in the comb. Candy absorb moisture from the hive, so it protected the hive from decay. Place it directly on the top of the frames. This way, if the cluster moves, the bees can still access food directly over their heads. This prevents bees from having to break the cluster to get their food source. So this is especially during the very cold weather and cold days. Candy enable bee workers to survive longer than syrup over winter. Recipe of preparing the candy. Ingredients, there are many recipes, but I myself work and doing this recipe. For each 1 kilogram of soft white sugar, 200 milliliters of concentrated sugar syrup of 24 hours soaked Artemisia for nosema control. Artemisia is a white plant grown mainly in the desert area, in our area. 1 tablespoon cinnamon dracena, 1 tablespoon turmeric, 1 fruit lemon juice to maintain the freshness of the candy, and 1 tablespoon, 15 milliliters of apple cider vinegar, antifungal and antimicrobial to retard mold growth. Mix this with the sugar, soft sugar, grounded sugar, and until it becomes a candy. The candy structure must be soft texture that does not stick to the hand. It's not recommended to add a source of protein to the sugar paste during the winter because the protein pushes the queen to lay eggs. And in the case of winter, the bees are unable to warm the brood, as mentioned earlier, which leads to its death. The dose is of this candy, for about half a kilo per hive of 7 to 10 frames for 2 weeks, or quarter a kilo, 250 grams per hive of less than 7 frames for 2 weeks. Placing the candy placed directly on the top of the brood frames, or better yet, into a candy board. This way, if the cluster moves, the bees can still access food directly over their heads. This prevents bees from having to break cluster to get their food source. Sugar syrup should be replaced by candy as soon as the average ambient temperature drops below 17 Celsius degrees. Candy is the preferred method of feeding overwintering bees. Here is the candy over the hives. The most important precautions when feeding bees. The best food for bees is honey and pollen from the same hive to prevent transferring the diseases and pests. We must use the manufacturer sugar solution, the best types of pure sugar, because of the use of pure sugar or the burnt sugar solutions as a result of heating causes diseases. Many beekeepers are looking for the cheap sugar, which is the waste of the manufacturers, which cause the disease of the bees. When placing the food inside the hive, it must be closed well, and the floors should be placed on the top of each other, if any, and in the hive cover should be locked, and the door opening should be narrowed to prevent theft. The feeders must be placed in the appropriate position for them, as it's noted that the slow feeders drop the solution from them if they are tilted. Feeding takes place in the evening. from afternoon to sunset so that the communities are not exposed to theft. It's preferable to take the food in the next morning if the communities are inclined to steal. In general, the sugar solution is not left in the food for the long time so that it does not ferment it. Care must be taken to clean the feeding tools and equipments and to wash them with boiling water after each time food is provided to the bees. Any negligence in this will cause bee diseases while avoiding feeding other hives with the same nutrients except after cleaning them for fear of spreading diseases between the hives. These precautions are very important. Feeding in summer or spring should be stopped if the increase in the stock of the food is observed in the hexagonal eyes of in order to leave empty eyes for the queen to lay eggs to ensure that the increase in the number of bees and brood of the hives. The concentration of sugar solution should be used in a proportion to the different seasons of the year. It must be compared with the concentration of the nectar in the flowers. Care must be taken to provide the nutrition between seasons and between flowering periods for plants in the area, because during these periods, bees usually need food because it's not available in the surrounding environment. And if there is a shortage of the nectar, the queen will stop or lower the number of laying eggs, and this will cause the decline in the population of the workers in the hive. These are mainly my precautions and my instructions about feeding the hives, wishing for all the beekeepers in the Mediterranean the best and the profitable source of income from their bees. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ayed, for your presentation. I appreciate it, and we at Asala appreciate the presentation with the fruitful information you gave us. Thank you so much.
Thank you.